Reading
Yes, we're ready to go.
hot
All right.
dog. Here we
So
go.
that will give us a little more time.
Well, let's.
So now we were talking about the public hearings that the Napa County Planning Commission
Right.
was holding, and at this point,
Now, by that time, there was an organ. There were people building a kind of a network of support, whether it had a name or not. And there were two people who I remember as being, well, there really four, but those four are Jack Davies, who had the immediate understanding of the importance of contacting people in the community to get them to call their supervisor, write their supervisor, show up, and that. He had the concept of how to do that and the importance of it. So he and Jamie would be in Napa working to help this group too. They were here a lot. And not conveniently, you know. I mean, she had a little kid, and I think she was pregnant maybe during part of it, and it was, you know, that was hard work for both of them.
so they were going down to the county offices.
No, they would call. Well, okay. Person number 2 was Ellen Bueller. Now, Ellen Bueller was active in the League of Women Voters, which at that time was pretty good, and it was Ellen that also had started a league study on this. In other words, they made a study group, so they were way ahead. They were way ahead. And she knew people who knew and were for it.
And who were the other two people?
Well, one of them was Janet Altman, I believe. Now, Janet was also active in the league. Trying to think who else. I thought of one, but no, she wasn't active by then.
And Warren Winiarski.
Well, you'd have to ask Warren about that part, because the Up Valley group, John also had a lot of them. And he well might have gotten Warren involved. I don't remember Warren being here. See, but that I didn't know.
Because that
Valley
was
people.
more the Up Valley.
Mm-hmm.
When you say John, who do you mean John?
Oh, I mean Jack Davies.
Oh, Jack Davies.
Yeah, I don't remember Jack.
I see. What about Felix Vandershoot?
Felix was a commissioner, and Felix was devoted to this idea. Absolutely devoted.
And was he quite persuasive?
Trying to think. Well, Felix told you what he thought and why, and he was clear. He wasn't a speaker. I mean, he could talk perfectly well, but he just wasn't a speaker. The guy that was... Is Andy Fajani on that list? On that planning commissioner list?
No, I have Andrew Polisa.
Andy Polisa is who I'm thinking of. Andy Polisa was very simple in his expression, but Andy Polisa was persuasive. There was something about Andy that if he told you it was so, and then he would listen and then he would explain to you why. There was something about Andy. I think Andy did persuade a lot of people. I think Felix persuaded not ag people, but urban people. City folk. And during that time, the seeds of UNVA were also really, they had to have been forming.
At about this time.
It seems to me they came out of this fight saying we have to have an organization. that was just too dicey. I'm not sure of that, but that's what I think. Because we took the idea of Napan's opposing wastelands to Jack Davies, and Jack said, I can't join you because you're going to be too political. Now, of course, some in our group took that as an insult and others took it as a fact. Uh, but he was right. We were formed to affect the decision making at the commission and the board. And UNVA was not. UNVA was formed to sort of do long studies and be persuasive.
More of a community
Kind of.
based.
It was always kind of too soft spoken for me, but that style, and they were all up valley, and there wasn't anything wrong with that. But they didn't want to recruit down here. It was in later years that they decided they would welcome some members from Napa.
Do you remember then a very big distinction then between, let's say, the lower valley and the upper valley?
Oh, yeah. Upper Napa Valley, not United. Today, it's United, but then it was Upper Napa Valley Associates.
Were there ill feelings between up and down valley?
Oh, there was a lack of understanding, maybe, but I don't think so. No more than you see now. But what it is, it's a difference of experience where you live. Your community is very, very different, and it has different sensitivities. And the Upper Napa Valley saw itself as the place where the good guys lived, and Napa was where the riffraff lived, and everybody knew that, you know. So, but there wasn't a lot of friction. It was just simply those were assigned roles from their perspective. Now, from Napa and Opposing Wasteland's perspective, we felt that it didn't matter to us who belonged as long as they belonged and as long as they had something to contribute. So one of our lovely first members was Fred Monhoff, an architect from Calistoga, who was just wonderful. And he was long retired, but he would come all the way down for these dumb bagged lunches in the park, And we had people from all over.
How do you spell his name?
Monhoff.
And he was an architect.
Mm-hmm.
And so your meetings would mostly be lunches in parks.
Yeah, well,
just very.
We didn't know anybody who had a room. It was a good thing the weather was good that year. And Renee DeRosa joined us quickly. Renee DeRosa found out about us and showed up.
And other names that I have here are Kent Ingalls.
Okay, Kent was soft-spoken, honest as the day is long.
Was he a commissioner?
Yeah, I think so. He was at one time. The terms I can't tell you.
Very soft-spoken.
Very soft-spoken.
John McFarland, of course.
Yeah.
George Blaufus.
George. Well, George lived in the city of Napa, and he was really interested in planning. And George was a wit. He was funny. He wasn't terribly serious. I mean, he cared a lot about values, but he just wasn't real serious sometimes. If he didn't have an interest in it, it really didn't interest him. And I think he did have an interest, but.
So you were talking about George Blaufus.
Yeah, he was witty. He was bright. But George would if George became interested in something, he was very interested. If he was not, he was totally disinterested. And I think he bought into the Ag Preserve, but I don't think George, I I think it gave it good press, if you will. But I don't think it meant that much to him in a way. I think if it came across, it was a great idea. If it didn't, we'll move on, that sort of thing.
What about Fred Berry?
Fred Berry is another very quiet. Don would have to tell you Fred Berry understood it. I really don't know. I suspect that he did, but I don't know.
And then J.W. Bentley.
Sorry.
So now at this point, the proponents who maybe participated in the hearings were Jack and Jamie Davies.
Yes.
Louis Martini. Were there?
I remembered that it wasn't John Daniel.
No, and this is when we start getting the opposition coalescing, isn't it?
Yeah, and when the opposition coalesced, it was almost. There's always a group in every community that does not want more restrictive zoning, period. And that group, plus those agricultural owners who did not want anybody limiting their potential for for frankly selling their land. They didn't want to be fixed in the grape business or any agriculture business. And that was the group. And I'm sure John Daniel's motivation was that of a libertarian. The government has no right to tell me what I can do with my land and my future. And I think that was the motivator for those in the ag community who did not support it.
What about B.C. Solari?
Oh my God, I haven't heard that name. Name from my past. That's all I can tell you.
Cameron Baker.
Here's another one.
So Cameron Baker, John Daniel, and Solari all formed the United Vintners.
Yes.
And the United Vintners was strongly opposed.
Yes. And I don't know but what. They may have been the group around which the court cases then got filed.
Yes, I think so. So now in mid-January 1968, the Napa County Planning Commission, having completed their hearings, approved the Ag Preserve ordinance and sent it
to the board.
In draft form.
Well, they send it in completed form, and the board has the right to change it. They don't send it's not like a real draft. It's an ordinance in itself, and you receive it as a board member. You receive it done. Now, you probably have already been receiving all along copies of them as they're working through it. But what you get is...
You get the final.
Exactly.
So they send that to the Board of Supervisors, and then the Board of Supervisors had to have hearings.
Right.
And so their hearings were held in March of 68. And I wonder if you could tell me what you remember about those public hearings.
Well, I remember them being the ones, I went to two, I think, and only two. The one I remember the clearest was at Redwood Junior High's big auditorium or gymnasium. They had a big room anyway. It had a stage, but it also had could be used for a cafeteria, or it could be used for a gym, or it could be used for, it's a big multi-purpose room. And it was in the evening so that everybody could come. And that was new for the board. They were holding evening hearings on this because they realized they needed to have everybody have an opportunity. And I can remember that by that time I had been involved in one school bond or school tax election after another because Napa had grown in spite of everything else. And we were building schools like crazy. And so I remember that that the parents in the room that I knew from that school group, from that election group that had built gradually over the years, that those people, I really said, I've had enough. I don't know about you, but I've had enough. There are just kids pouring out of these new small subdivisions, and we just can't keep going. And there isn't going to be money. And so we just really honestly have to say, save that farmland and stop this paving for a while. And on that basis, I got an awful lot of them to appear at those hearings. And I only remember saying, you cannot educate a grape. You do not have to pay to educate a grapevine. And the public doesn't have to pay for that. And that's all I can remember saying. Undoubtedly, knowing me, I said much more. But that's... because who I was after at that time were the activists in the school building and school paying for community. By that time, the political people, other than, let's say, the Chamber of Commerce, which is always political, or we didn't have partisan politics involved in local issues. The other place where we had hundreds of names and people who would, go door to door and all that stuff, were in these myriads of bond and tax elections that we'd had.
So were there a lot of people who handed out brochures?
Nope, I don't remember that. I'm sure we were really not very sophisticated. And I don't know who the we was, being truthful with you. I think Jack Davies probably found most of the money that was spent by the pro people. The county has the legal right to describe the issue and to describe the results financially. They have the legal right to do that. But they can't say, vote for this because it's really nifty. They're the stuff they pay for, just like schools. It has to be informational only.
Now, was there a lot of acrimony at this particular?
Yeah, there were. There were always both of the ones that I went to. Now, this was the biggest at Redwood, but there were others. I went to one other that was smaller.
Where was that one?
I don't remember. It was down in this area, but I don't remember. And I remember that always you had, was it Louis Solari? Seems to me that might have been what he called himself. Anyway, you always had this hardcore of people who said, you can't do that to me. You can't, you have no right to zone my land, to fix me on my land. And it was fascinating because no one questioned, and this is what I think is so hilarious looking back, nobody questioned but that they would definitely have a market loss by going under this zoning. Not a single person, as far as I know. It was all done on community values, on the community paying, and if it got paved, it was nobody argued, yeah, your land will be worth something when you're done. Nobody. But by 1974, they were paying more for grape land than they were for subdivision land. Inside the preserve, it was more money than if they had sold that same ranch 2 miles down the road for a subdivision.
And people probably would have
I never
not been able to believe that would happen so quickly.
I wouldn't have believed it. And therefore, when I went to the Pacific Legal Foundation thing on the county, I said, I need to hear how the other half is living. So I went down to San Diego to sit in one of their things, and this guy gets up and he says, the worst example of all is Napa County. You should just see the bottom has fallen out of land values. And I was mad, and I stood up, and I said, you are entirely mistaken about values in Napa County. And I said, if you really want to know, you need to go there, and you'll find out that the value inside that zone is twice the value outside that zone as of now. And he looked at me like he could have killed me, and I didn't care. I thought, that man's running around, millions of dollars behind him, spreading that falsehood.
That was the Pacific
Legal Foundation. They're still very active. They're always against everything.
Interesting.
So,
how do you remember the acrimony being played out in these two hearings?
I never remember anything physical. I do remember there were times when I thought it would be. We always had a sheriff's deputy there after the first ones. And he was kind of like a sergeant at arms and, hung back. They were standing up in front with their Uzis. But they were there. They were there. And I was always glad they were there. I always felt that many of the men were very, very angry people. And they were true libertarians. They really did believe that this was going to kill them.
Do you remember John Daniel being very angry?
John was very outspoken. John had a better control of his anger than some of his compatriots as far as speaking in public. You knew John was angry, but you didn't confront a raging, I'll kill you guys kind of guy, where there were others who did.
Do you remember any of those individuals?
Yeah, I just remember they all looked heavy and they all wore jeans and they all looked to me like they were growers. But I don't know that they were, because later on I think some of them were just investors in the winery or members of the co-op or something like that. At the time they all seemed to me to be farmers or people that I knew were in the wine biz, And the wine wasn't very big then, There were only about 8.
Yeah.
I don't know. I never counted them, but.
Yes, it was still to come. More still to come. So now in April 9th of 1968, Ordinance 274 passed,
Mm-hmm.
and the creation of the Ag Preserve was well on its way. And there was a lawsuit filed against that ordinance.
Correct.
By the Napa Valley United Farmers.
Right.
And that was led by John Daniel.
Yes.
Do you remember the law firm?
Oh, geez. Oh, I remember seeing I did go to the Supreme Court hearing on that.
Now, it did go to the Supreme Court.
Uh-huh.
I talked to somebody who said, no, it didn't go as far as the Supreme Court.
Oh, I think it did.
It did.
It might have been the appeals court. No, and I don't know. Was this Ag Preserve or the other one? Anyway, I went to this hearing, but
But you went to a hearing.
yeah, I didn't go to the Supreme Court on that one. I went to the Supreme Court on another one.
Okay.
On Measure J.
All right.
And it took a long time to wind its way through the courts, and the courts held as I don't think we ever doubted that we were going to win in the courts, primarily because it was such a modest beginning. This wasn't done saying stay out of Napa County. This county looked green and bigger than God when you laid in these just few acres in the bottom. And so this was a very modest little local zoning ordinance. Even by Supreme Court standards, this thing was nothing. And it was a little early. They hadn't the state regulations. There were no EIRs yet. And there were, and I don't know this guy, Dan Curtin, who is the zoning guru of law in California. I don't think he'd written his books yet. But when you really came right down to it, it was the rezoning of a pocket of land to preserve its agricultural productivity. And, how are you going to say to somebody, I used to have one and now I can't have 1 in 20. I used to have ability to build all these houses, and now I can only build one on my 20-acre park. Well, how is the Supreme Court going to say you've been deprived of your rights? Even in those days, I never understood it. In the East, there were all manner of wild zoning stuff going on. And out here, you would have thought that we were taking away their water. You know, I really, as a person, I was a planning commissioner for the city at that time. And so I understood. I was reading planning law, reading everything I could get my hands on. And I still looked at that and I thought, there is no way that a Supreme Court is going to throw that out.
Well, it was only a little bit more than 100 years since the gold rush, so in a sense,
Yeah, but zoning law had been a federal understood in the 1920s. You know, this wasn't something that
wasn't a new concept.
no. And communities all up and down California were zoning for this many houses here and trying to get parks. I mean, growth was everywhere around you, and there were all kinds of quid pro quos, and you got to build a park if you can build 20 homes, all that kind of stuff. It was all beginning, so I never understood. Now I understood later when they put an AW and we went really downzone Napa. That one I felt if John Daniel had been alive, that one would have gone to the Supreme Court.
Now that you're talking about the agricultural watershed,
but by the general plan that really rezoned most of Napa, what's that, 76, 74, 75, 76, 77?
73. But now in 1971, the suit was resolved. We're not sure which court level.
No, I'm not. Although I understand I thought it went all the way. I know Measure J did.
And then in 2 years later, you run for the Board of Supervisors. And what was it that motivated you to run for the Board of Supervisors?
Probably that it was an interesting challenge. Probably because I had seen them do some pretty dumb things. I mean, that was a really 1950s mentality on that board by the still. And Al didn't mind that it was. They were a lot easier to lead than anybody with new ideas. So they didn't have new ideas. And see, the rest of the county, they were still letting it grow. And we didn't have a general plan. We didn't have a way to hang on to any of this, any place else. All we had was this, 28,000 acres. The rest of the county, you could have built anything you wanted just about.
And the ag preserve on the floor only went as far as Oak Knoll.
Right.
Didn't go any further south.
Came a little further south here and there. Little tiny bits of it.
And up till now, it's not on the hillsides.
No.
Otherwise known as the ag watershed.
Right.
So you ran.
I ran on growth.
On controlling growth.
Yes.
And I understand you won 52% of the vote.
I bet you that I won about 50.09. I would not have won the runoff. If I were not elected in June, I would not have been elected in November. I was running against Tweedledum and Tweedledee. And they just looked alike, and they campaigned alike, and they were just the same thing, alike. And so here I was, somebody not alike.
Who were your opponents?
Jack Ferguson and Jack Baughman, who is no longer with us. He's Baughman. Yeah. So as I say, they were like Tweedledum and Tweedledee. One would say the same thing as the other. I think he's right. And, it wasn't exciting. It wasn't interesting.
Well, Jack Ferguson was pro.
He was pro the ag preserve, but Jack he wasn't going to go any further. I always felt that he just sort of ran because he thought he'd been on it before and it would be a good idea. I never, you know, where I was willing to turn the place upside down, which is why I got defeated 4 years later.
But you were the first woman
Yeah.
ever
On the board.
On the board of supervisors, so that was a big.
Well, you can only imagine the shock when the 3 members of the board are confronted with their first woman and this kid who ain't even 30.
You were that young?
No, John. John won in the same election.
Oh, yes. He was like 31.
Well, he was about 30, 31. Sam was real young when he got in. Sam was the second youngest ever to get in.
Sam Chapman?
Sam Chapman. And the kid down in Santa Cruz was 2 months younger than Sam, so he was the youngest ever to be elected.
Yeah,
but
how old were you at this stage?
Well, let's see, 1972 was the election year. 27, what was I, 30, 40 something? 27, 30. That's 40, and then, 43. 45.
So, I mean, you were a young woman. And how did we get to the agricultural watershed coming under the concept of the ag preserve? Did this happen when you were on the board?
Yeah.
So you were elected to the board in.
Well, I came on the board in 73.
In the fall.
Mm-hmm. No, January of 73.
Right. January 73.
Mm-hmm.
So then you.
Yeah, the redoing of the general plan was really what John and I both ran on, was an understanding of redoing of getting a general plan that was agriculturally oriented.
Because now there was the Vintners Inn lawsuit.
Now that one.
That's around this time?
I think it's later.
Didn't that force you to redraft the general plan?
Yeah, one of them did, and for the life of me, my recollection is that while I did work on this, did vote for the 73, that the general plan process went on, and that the final pieces of the general plan were done after I was off the board. That there were still pieces hanging out that were very central, and that they were still hanging out. It may have been just my impression.
Yes, I think the Vintage Inn lawsuit, I think, was actually much later.
Yeah, I remember it was. Oh yeah, that's way down the road.
Way down the road.
No, this was just moving from a cow county to one with urban pressures. That's all. And I had spent 4 years on the City Planning Commission. And it was on the City Planning Commission that I realized what growth was really about, because one night we approved 650 new homes in Napa. And I said publicly, I will never, ever do that again. We are through growing like that. And that's how Harold Kelly and I got together. It was Harold who was working on the city end of the growth.
Yes, now John Tudor was saying that this whole issue of agricultural preservation lies on two legs. One is growth control, and the other one is protecting ag land.
Well, the third leg, and I've talked to you about this before, and it must be in there. The only reason the Ag Preserve has survived is the city's RUL. Without it, it would have gone long ago.
But doesn't that fall under the rubric of controlled growth?
By whom is the question? And you see, we can't beg that question. Should the county have continued, we're willing. What about this city with a general plan that says it's going to be 120,000 by the year? Okay? I mean, that was the revolt of the city, the revolt of the people who lived in the city of Napa, was as important to the preservation of agriculture as the ag preserve itself. It was, in the long run, it is really more important, in my view.
The revolt of the city.
The city mothers and fathers just simply had a hissy fit. They decided they were going to annex, and did annex, 100 and some odd acres at the corner of Silverado Trail and Trancas Monticello, and so the what you look at when you go up Silverado Trail and you have to stop and jog across the creek and then go up. What you're looking at was to be a big subdivision with all kinds of markets and everything wonderful, and they annexed it. The city did, saying, growth is good. We're on our way to Silverado. We're going to annex it tomorrow. And the citizens revolted. And some of them, I mean, I was among them, but there was a big, big, big group. And they collected signatures, and they collected money, and they got a petition to put it on the ballot that they had to de-annex it. And the city sued them, and they went all the way through the courts, proving that, yes, indeed, a city's annexation was referendable. The city said, you can't referend an annexation, and the state Supreme Court said, sure you can. And so they had referended it. Now, when they did that, the council, in its embarrassment, not only put the annexation on, but decided that they would be sweet, and they would put on something called an advisory vote, which was a new thing. And John Dunlap carried the legislation that allowed us to have an advisory vote on growth. And the advisory vote gave people three choices. One was, I think, 150, and one, I think, was 120, and another one was 75. And everybody put 75.
This is growth.
Growth,
levels.
yeah.
We're talking about Napa City.
Yeah.
Could grow to any one of these three.
Yeah, they said, which level do you want? And
and everybody, the vast majority said 75.
Oh yeah. I don't remember the numbers, but they were out of sight. And the city council then, now see, Harold's on here, and I think Dorothy's about to come on, and there's a lot of good
you're
people.
Still on the city council. You're not on the board.
I'm in the, let's see, no, I'm running for the board, and then I get on the board. I've gotten off the planning commission so that I could run.
Oh.
So it's all in that range, series of elections. And so the city de-annexed the property. And then they started listening to reason. They finally decided, oh, gee, we do have a problem. And that is when one of their planners came up and said, why don't you decide to build a line around and hold hearings on that line and simply say that you want to fill inside the line before you'll consider expanding your limits. And it wasn't necessarily city limits. It was something that looked for growth. I mean, there were lots, but it was a line beyond which they didn't plan to grow. And it immediately removed the pressure off the ag preserve. And it immediately took the pressure off of Coombsville, took the pressure off of Carneros, took the pressure off of every side they had. And so the county then, when they came in with stuff like ag watershed, nobody cared. Because the action was in the city, and they had to stay in the city to do anything. So I think our first ag watersheds, though, were only 40 acres.
Yes. And then later it grew to 160.
In some places, yeah.
In some places.
Mm-hmm.
Now, wasn't there also a strip or a band around Napa City where the zoning was 10 acres?
The county did, in its general plan, look to the development, their theory was this: you hold parcels in a large enough piece so that if it becomes time to develop it, it will be big enough that you will get a developer who can do something with it. Because they don't like working in an area of half-acre lots. It's over. And so, yes, they did a 10-acre, I think it's called rural residential or something. They still have it. But it was in this Coombsville area, which was all shot with smaller parcels. And by saying you could have 10, it just about fit what was there anyway. There weren't very many parcels that were out of that size. And so all the people who were in it, they were fine. They were grandfathered. And then if you had 30 acres, you had some home sites, you had some, but you couldn't go down to this 2.5 acre and 5 acre because a developer isn't interested then. And what you get is just hash. Now that's in the county, not the city. That's what the county did with lands outside the RUL.
Oh, all right. Yeah, it's outside
Mm-hmm.
the urban limit.
Mm-hmm.
Now, at what point was any growth for Napa City up to the vote of the people?
Okay.
We're talking about that.
I'm talking about that, what's called the Longwood Ranch, and the subsequent votes, the votes for the vote to de-annex, the vote to pick the new population goal, and then ultimately this establishment of the RUL. Now, today, but not then, if you want to amend the RUL, you have to have a vote of the people.
It's not a city council.
Right, not
decision.
anymore. Not anymore.
And when did that happen?
Just recently, maybe last 4 or 5 years, Harry Martin carried it. So it would be about then.
So then in 1977, we have the agricultural preserve being expanded further south
Right.
into North Napa City.
Well, the Ag Preserve,
or to Salvador.
Salvador, and down Brown's Big Ranch Road a bit.
And
but also in those intervening years, and I would have no idea when they were, they came out to Carneros and made an AP there. I think there were 3 APs. I'm not sure.
Now, Dell Martz and Sam Chapman
came on the board in 1975, January of 75.
And were they?
They were good guys. They were pro limiting growth, pro agriculture. The nice part of the changes is that by that time now, the board is also pro social services. In other words, John and I never could pick up that third vote on that kind of stuff.
Now, what do you mean?
Well, John and I could never pick up a third vote in terms of food stamps. That was optional, by the way. And you know, there were a lot of things in the social services that there were services we didn't provide, or we provided them at such a minimum. And it was the beginning of what we now know internationally as the NGO movement. But those were new nonprofits coming into town. The OEO, Office of Economic Opportunity. That was
federal.
Yeah,
the
federal program, but it was able to spin off nonprofits. And so all of those things were festering too. So we had a lot of change in the areas of mental health, in the areas of food. We never could get a total county clinic running. So that's where, Clinical Aid, bless their hearts, fills to this day. To this day.
Now, in 1990, we come to Measure J.
Mm-hmm.
And that
fix it. No, what it did, yeah, sort of. Into the ag preserve, into the zoning ordinance that governed ag ag, the whole ag designated, which by now is 99% of the county or 90% of the county by this time. Measure J said that if the board wanted to change the zoning from AW to any other non-agricultural use, it had to make findings. And the findings had to include, it has all urban services, it has it's near this, near that. And, or it went to the voters. Now, I'm unclear, but I think I remember that first language said that they could allow the zoning, and then you would have to like referendize if you thought they were wrong. You'd have to pass get a referendum.
So in other words, more reactive.
Yeah, right. You'd have to gather all those signatures again and do that. And I'm not. I don't remember whether the board, if the board, of course, went the other way, and violated its own general plan. The idea is still that you have to referendize. You can't take them to court. You force it onto the ballot. Is your best way. So all this said was, hey, if you want to be anything other than ag in any of these ags, you got to make a series of findings as a board that this is, and you could probably make those findings, by the way, out right next to Coombs Silverado Junior High. You could probably make those findings on that dairy out there. There's sewer stubs out there, city water stubs out there. There's, there's a bus within 6 blocks. There's a, you could probably, if the board decided that it wanted to put some garage there or some nice cow barn that wants to sell stuff.
You're saying that
today they still could do it because they probably could make the findings. They probably could make these. They could say, "Hey, sewer's right there, water's right there. It's annexable to the city. You're within X, Y, Z of all these things. There's a city park half a block away. There's a schoolyard next door. You could probably make all those findings on something right next to Silverado if you wanted. They don't want, and nobody wants them to.
Do you think that this is going to continue? I mean, that this protection of the ag preserve?
I think the protections are pretty well honored. I think they're going to pick at the edges. That's what I was doing today from 9 to 3. Is this attempt to put this enormously attractive, internationally, golf course with 54 houses in the middle of Pope Valley.
Oh, Pope Valley.
Yeah.
Yes. You mean the Etna Springs?
No, I mean Louisiana Golf Course. Etna Springs is an old resort a mile and a half away. The same people want to take this little pristine valley and make a world-class golf course with 54 dwelling units.
And that's the same developer.
Mm-hmm.
Which is...
But of course, we're not connected. The EIR says we're not connected. And the EI says the houses aren't even connected with the golf course. But we've looked at the houses and they're okay.
And the developer's name is?
Radovan and Criswell, or Criswell and Radovan.
So you were at the...
So that's where I was, yeah. I was at the hearing.
Held by the Board of Supervisors.
Yeah. It's all held by the Planning Commission.
Oh, by the Planning Commission. Now, at what point did you get off the board?
Oh, by request. I was defeated in 1976, so I only stayed on there 4 years.
And you were replaced by Harold Moskowitz. How did you feel about leaving the board?
Well, I'd never been defeated quite like that, so I went through that. I also felt that Harold was not going to be very good for Napa, and they did have to work around him for quite a while. And
He was pro-development.
yes, and and he was one of those, you can't tell me what to do with my land, which is why, and he had a lot of land and he had a lot of money and he was
What was his profession?
farmer, developer, rancher, developer.
Was he in Napa City?
He lived up in Berryessa at that time. He now lives down here, but he lived in Berryessa at that time.
Now you and John Tudor were pretty much like-minded on most issues.
Most issues, yeah. Uh-huh.
And you became good friends as well?
Right. It's had a little testing lately, but that's okay.
Well, I wanted to ask you, we've come to the end, and yes, sorry to take so long.
No, we've chatted.
I just wanted to ask you if there's anything that you wanted to add for the record about your experience with the Ag Preserve, or
No, as long as you've added the RUL and that progression, I think people tend, particularly in this context, in the Jack Davies context, this is agricultural history, and I think its interface with the necessary urban history is not understood. I don't think many of them understand it. And I don't think they understand it that the whole community has to be whole. That it isn't just, they view their industry in many ways like General Motors views Detroit or wherever, the Flint or wherever they have. That the community's lucky to have them, and you shouldn't complain, and don't mess with me now.
you're talking about the wine industry?
I'm talking about that whole wine, the whole business. Now, we have the most enlightened Farm Bureau of any in California, beyond any question. The director of that is superb. It's Sandy Ellis. She's just superb. And they have always been good. They've always been good. But the simple truth is that even they do not understand what they owe to the city councils who are not fighting them. They do not understand what they owe to those people. I mean, there is nothing. If St. Helena can come to a meeting and say, as they did, we're all grown up. All right, what does that mean? You're sure as hell not going to grow up. What do you mean? You mean you're drawing a line and you're saying nobody else can move there? What does that mean? City of Yountville announces its last parcel's gone. See ya. City of Calistoga says, well, we can take a few over in this corner and that's it. Is that really going to be the way it's going to go? Is all, are they going to push everybody here? Are they going to say, gosh, that's important to push everybody there?
Here being Napa
Here
City.
being from below Trower, basically,
will
or
Napa
below
City have
Salvador.
to absorb?
It isn't just the city, it's the whole half of the county. Little do they realize that the more they do that, the more their difficulties are going to get, because the voters don't live where they live. And, and sooner or later, and if they were today acknowledging the work that the cities have also done to protect their borders, including the city of American Canyon, who, bless their hearts, they've gotten in sideways 1,000 times with everybody in this county, but bless their hearts, they did an urban limit line just recently, and they set that line on their side of 2 large vineyards because they agreed the county could protect them better than they could. Thank you, American Canyon. Send them a letter. Tell them you are marvelous. We'll do our very best to protect that piece of property in agriculture for your northern edge. And I don't think anybody sent him a thank you note, but that has nothing to do with the Ag Preserve.
But, but it does. But you're saying that because Calistoga, Yountville, and St. Helena are
They announced at a growth summit. Well, they announced at this growth summit, the thing that they had in October, that they were full.
What was the growth summit?
Oh, they had this big growth summit. They had all the planners and all the electeds and all the people that wanted to come, and they divided you into work groups, and each of the cities made a statement, and I thought, I'm going to throw up.
So you're saying, I want to be clear what your point is. You're saying that creates a problem
Sure it does.
because Napa City then has to be the one.
The misunderstandings of what is rural and what is urban, the misunderstanding of how to protect rural for its own sake. If you overcrowd, if you don't make allowances, and I include the city of Napa in this, I don't think we're very far from needing an adjustment in the RUL. It's been in since the 70s. I think it probably needs expansion. I don't know in what direction. I wouldn't know which way. But I don't think you can just say to people, once they've really built up most of the land inside, well, sorry, Charlie, I'm full. Now, if the city of Napa ever said that, what do you think would happen to agriculture? The vote wouldn't hold. The zoning is 3 votes in 30 days. And you have to, so you have to be sensitive to the fact that you can't push all your dirt under the rug and not expect to have trouble. You can't, you've got, this is the problem that, well, it has nothing to do with the ag preserve, and yet it has everything. County doesn't build any housing. Oh, come on. Give me an effing break. Sure, you should build housing. You think you don't have any workers? Where do you think the ag workers live? Why don't you go visit them once in a while? And that is just simply wrong. They have the big industry, and they don't want to build the housing.
So it's the difference between controlled, measured growth.
Oh, sure.
Or no growth.
And they take agriculture, says, I don't see why you need any place for my workers to live. And now, not all. Here we have an ordinance allowing a vintner or grower to give land for housing, and that's unique.
For farm workers.
You bet. And here we also have an industry who supports the clinic, an industry that supports, they tax themselves to be sure that there's enough housing. Okay. So I don't think it's all on them, but I think the political attitude is one they need to be very careful about. Very careful about. They're going to have to, instead of saying, it burns me to a crisp to have somebody say, well, I see Napa pipe coming down there with 3,000 houses. Better you than us. Gee, hey guys, 350 of them will be low-income houses. I say to Diane, we don't have a slum yet in Napa. Don't build us one. You put that many low-income houses in one spot, completely away from all the rest of the services, that is a definition of trouble any time.
What would you see as the consequence of these upper valley cities just holding their growth top?
Go right ahead. You've just lost the AW.
That
See, ag preserve is going to be protected, but AW, they're up there trying to put a goddamn golf course in it. What if they were trying to put 100 houses instead of 54? Would it make any difference? I don't know.
Oh, I see. So you're just saying that the pressure on the agricultural watershed
and on your decision makers. They just got rid of a planning commissioner. I managed to get a guy elected who appoints a decent planning commissioner, and the guys who fought my new guy went back and got rid of the head of the planning commission with rumors and innuendos and lies.
Planning commission.
The county planning commission.
Oh,
that just happened.
Okay.
That just happened. Now, once they will go for that, they'll get the seat. And while they only need on the county board, you really only need one more seat. And you could put anything you wanted in that ag watershed.
It's that fragile.
It's that fragile. So you can break your arm patting yourself on the ag for the ag preserve, but the answer is not there. Those ag preserves will be there forever if they want to be, but they'll be surrounded by hillside subdivisions and strip malls and freeways up and down the valley and you name it. Because all that can occur in ag watershed. If they get 3 votes in 30 days, it's over. That's why Margaret Ann and I were where we were.
That's why you and
Margaret Ann were where we were. She was there too this morning.
She was there too, of course. Margaret Ann Watson.
Yes.
Well, I want to thank you.
Well, I took too much of your time.
No,
I should really.